In today's video, my goal is simple. By the end of this video, you will understand why people manipulate, you will also know the 5 most common forms of manipulation, and why it is so hard not to fall for their tactics. And most importantly, you will know how to protect yourself better. I'm a licensed therapist and I've seen countless people trapped in cycles of manipulation, not because they're weak, but because these tactics are designed to exploit normal human emotions. So let's dive in. Before we get into the tactics themselves, you need to understand something crucial. Manipulation is just an unhealthy tool people use to achieve a goal or to meet a need. It is not about you. They use manipulation because at some point in their life, it worked. Maybe they learned it from a parent. Maybe they discovered it accidentally in a relationship. Maybe they've been doing it for so long that they don't even realize that they're doing it anymore. And now they're hoping it's going to work on you. Understanding this helps you not take it so personally, because when someone is manipulating you, they don't necessarily see you. They see an opportunity to get what they want. You're just a person that they're willing to experiment with. That doesn't make it easier, but it does make it easier to recognize that their behavior says everything about them and nothing about your worth. So let's talk about the 5 forms of manipulation that you need to recognize. Manipulation tactic number 1 is the silent treatment. The silent treatment is when someone deliberately withdraws all communication as a way to punish you or force you to comply with what they want. This is not the same as someone who needs space to cool down. It is also not the same as someone setting a healthy boundary. And it's definitely not the same as ghosting or walking away from a toxic person. The silent treatment is strategic. Here's what it looks like. You do something that they don't like. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you said no. Maybe you simply didn't read their mind correctly. And suddenly, radio silence. They won't tell you what's wrong. They won't even have a conversation with you. They just freeze you out. They're standing right next to you, but completely ignoring you. This is not about needing space. It's about punishing you. And here's why it works. Humans are social creatures. We are wired to fear rejection and abandonment. So when someone gives you the silent treatment, your brain interprets it as a threat. You start panicking, you start wondering what you did wrong, you replay every conversation, trying to figure out how to fix it. And eventually, you cave. You apologize for things you didn't do, you drop the boundary, you give them exactly what they wanted. That's the point. The silent treatment isn't about needing space. It's about training you to never challenge them again. Manipulation tactic number 2, guilt tripping. Guilt is one of the most powerful emotions a manipulator can use because guilt makes you question yourself. It makes you feel responsible for things you shouldn't feel responsible for. Guilt tripping sounds like this. Wow, I guess I just don't matter to you. If you really cared about me, you would do this for me. Or a little more specific, if you were my true friend, you would send me that money. And notice how they never say, hey, that hurt my feelings, can we talk about it? They make vague, loaded statements designed to make you feel like you are doing something wrong, even when you're not. Maybe you set a boundary, and suddenly you're selfish. You say no to something, and suddenly you don't care. You don't respond immediately, and suddenly you're abandoning them. And here's what happens. You start second guessing yourself. You wonder, am I being a bad person? Am I not doing enough? So you overcompensate. You apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. You agree to things that you didn't want to do just to keep the peace. And the more you give in, the easier you are to control. That's not your guilt. That's their control. Manipulation tactic number 3, gaslighting. Gaslighting is when someone distorts reality to make you doubt yourself. It is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional manipulation because if done effectively, you won't even realize it's happening. This is what it sounds like. That never happened. I never said that. You must be remembering it wrong. You must be the crazy one. You always exaggerate things. At first, maybe you brush it off. Maybe you misheard or you misunderstood, and then it keeps happening. This is when you start second-guessing yourself again, you find yourself apologizing for things you were sure that they did, and after a while, you lose confidence in your own judgment. This happens in relationships, workplaces, and even families. A parent tells their child, "You're imagining things." A boss maybe tells their employee, "I never promised you that." And a partner might insist, "You're just being paranoid." And it's incredibly effective. Because once you start questioning your own memory, your own reality, you become easier to control. Instead of trusting your own instincts, you start trusting them. Instead of pushing back, you begin hesitating. People who are being gaslit often start keeping notes, screenshots, or recordings just to prove their own memory. If you find yourself doing that, you're not imagining things. That is exactly the point. Manipulation tactic number 4, love bombing. Love bombing is when someone overwhelms you with affection, attention, and grand gestures early on in a relationship, not because they genuinely care, but because they're trying to get you emotionally invested as quickly as possible. At first, it feels incredible. They compliment you constantly, they go out of their way to do things for you, they act like you're the best thing that's ever happened to them. You think, wow, this person really sees me. And then it stops. Not just gradually, it just fully stops. After they got what they wanted, now they're distant, less affectionate, and maybe even indifferent. And now instead of feeling secure, you start chasing their approval. You wonder if you did something wrong. Maybe you weren't affectionate enough. Maybe they're just stressed out. Maybe if you put in more effort, they'll go back to how they were in the beginning. And that's the trap. And the problem is, the kindness was never real. It was a tool to get you invested. The moment they saw that you were hooked, they didn't need to keep up the act anymore. And if you start pulling away, they can turn the charm back on. Not because they care, but because they sense that you're slipping. And the second they have reeled you back in, the cycle starts again. Manipulation tactic number 5, isolation. This is the final level, and it's the most dangerous one. Once an emotional manipulator has you alone, they have complete control. And they don't do it all at once. It starts very small. They make little comments about your friends. Are you sure they really have your best interest at heart? They plant seeds of doubts about your family. You know, your parents have never really supported you the way that I do. Maybe they make you feel guilty for spending time with other people. Oh, you're going out with them again? I guess I just don't matter to you that much. At first, you don't think much of it, but little by little, your world starts to shrink. You start seeing your friends less, you pull away from your family, and you stop reaching out because somehow it always turns into a problem. This is where the real damage starts, because when they are the only voice in your life, they get to rewrite reality. They get to mistreat you, and there's nobody there to challenge them. If you question their behavior, there's no one there to tell you that that's not okay. And because they've made sure you've distanced yourself from people who care, leaving now feels impossible. But it is not. Now, you probably heard all of the advice. Set boundaries, walk away, don't give them the reaction they want. But if it's that simple, why is it so hard to actually do? To understand that, we need to talk about the brain. Think of your brain in two parts. The back part of your brain is your emotional brain, and the front part of your brain is your logical brain. When you're in a high-stress situation, like when someone is trying to manipulate you, the emotional brain often takes over, so you react emotionally instead of logically. Maybe you lash out, you cry, you defend yourself frantically, and you apologize when you really shouldn't. And unfortunately, manipulators thrive on reactions. They don't actually care what reaction they get. Anger, sadness, fear, guilt. They just want a reaction, because as long as you're reacting, they have control. The moment you get emotional, they've won. Not because emotion is bad, but because the emotion in that moment means that they're dictating your internal state. In other words, they're in control of how you feel. So, how do you stop that? You need to build a bridge between the emotional brain and the logical brain. And that bridge is built through practice. Now, before I tell you how to practice it, I want you to know this. Sitting with guilt can be a sign of growth. One of the biggest reasons people fall for manipulation is because they cannot sit with guilt. And let me say that again. Guilt is not a bad thing. Guilt is a sign of growth. When you start setting boundaries, when you start saying no, and when you start pulling away from toxic people, you're going to feel guilty. That is normal, and that is a sign of growth. But here's what you need to understand. Guilt is just a physiological symptom. It's your body's response to doing something unfamiliar. And it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Your heart might race, your stomach might churn, you might feel like you're abandoning someone or being selfish, but feelings are not fact. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you're actually guilty. And the more you can practice sitting with that discomfort without you pushing it away, the more you realize it's just a temporary sensation. It passes, and on the other side of it, there's freedom. The manipulator is counting on you not being able to tolerate that guilt. They're counting on you caving the second you feel uncomfortable. But the moment you learn to sit with it, their tactics stop working. All right, so how do we actually build that skill? How do you train your brain to stay calm when someone is trying to manipulate you? For this, you gotta rehearse, ideally with a licensed therapist or a trusted person. Role play someone trying to manipulate you and practice responding calmly. Maybe you take a pause or a deep breath before you answer. Maybe you practice saying, I need some time to think about that, instead of just reacting immediately. When you do this, you're literally training your brain to access the logical part even when emotions are running high. And with enough practice, your calm, confident response becomes second nature. And I want you to know that when you're doing this, you're not suppressing your emotions. You're not pretending you don't feel anything. You're just giving yourself the tools to respond instead of react. If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Emotional manipulation is designed to make you feel trapped because it's not just about control. It's about confusion. It's about making sure you're so emotionally exhausted that you stop fighting back. But the second you start recognizing these tactics, they lose their power. So here's what you need to remember. You don't owe anyone your confusion, you don't owe anyone your guilt, and you don't owe anyone control over your emotions. You're allowed to walk away. If this video helped you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and see you in the next one.